Good morning, everyone. Today we're going to be going over the worst things that Athens or the Athenians did. And in Athens, if you were a male, fairly rich or wealthy, you were pretty much the best you could be. You had all the freedoms that came with being an Athenian citizen. You even had political responsibilities and could affect the laws, changes coming into your society somewhat actively. In fact, it was part of the law that you had to participate in this. If you weren't a man and you were a slave, a woman, or understandably much more so a child, then you didn't quite have this, but if you were a boy, then you could perhaps look into your future and have a smile on your face, otherwise you would probably be not quite that happy. Democracy wasn't perfect, but it worked a lot better for the men than anyone else. And have you ever heard the term draconian? Well, it actually comes from Greece. Athens itself. See, an Athenian lawmaker, called Draco or Drakon, was known to punish crimes that were serious or rather minor by death, regardless of how serious or minor they were. Also, these laws were apparently written in blood, and you could be killed for something as small as stealing an apple. I'd like to think that those who stole an apple and died for it under these laws would have lived good lives before actually needing to steal the apples, but the chances of that being the case are quite low, considering the fact that they would have needed to steal the apple in the first place. Now, these laws were naturally biased against the lower classes, but if you didn't get the point yet, you could be killed for pretty much nothing, doing next to nothing. We're just getting started here. Now, moving on to a bit of war with Sparta, after citizens from Megara farmed land devoted to Demeter by the Athens, and sheltered slaves who fled Athens, Megarian traders were barred from Athenian markets and trading ports. This also extended to those markets and ports across the Delian League. Athens was already engaged in some sort of conflict with Corinth, who was allied with Sparta and the Peloponnesian League. Athens couldn't just attack Corinth, as they would be breaking peace agreements with Sparta, and, well, they couldn't have that. So by excluding Megara from their normal trade routines, Megara's economy would have taken a massive hit, which could have had a knock-on effect on their allies, including Sparta. Sort of a justified preemptive strike, if you will, in the conflicts between the two nations, because Sparta wasn't happy about Athens' growing power and influence in Greece, and many Spartan soldiers were ready for war. So Athens could also still be the ones who upheld the treaty by having Sparta technically break it themselves. Part of the peace agreement was that each city-state was to let the other settle their own affairs, without any intervention from the other. After the Megarian decree was released, Sparta was mad and sent diplomats to demand that Athens revoke their decree. Of course, Athens didn't, so during the Peloponnesian War, it wasn't looking too great for the Athenians at some point, and this was around the same time that Alcibiades was given command or a role as a general in the Athenian army. He had good looks, charm, and was a skilled leader. He was somehow able to convince the Athenians to attack Sicily, because that was where the Spartans were getting their food supplies from. The Athenians were pretty desperate at this point. Just before the expedition to Sicily was to take place, someone hilariously removed the private parts of all of the statues of Hermes, and you can guess who was blamed. Alcibiades, not wanting to die or face some horrible time in prison or whatever the heck Athenians did to people who did that sort of thing, fled to Sparta and gained some of the Spartans' trust. He decided to tell them about the upcoming attack that was to happen at Sicily, and the Athenian attack on Sicily failed. This was such a great victory in the eyes of the Spartan people that they gave him a high position in the military and decided to trust him and didn't kill him, which is the main thing. He lived in Sparta for quite a bit, helping the Spartans out, until it was found out that he was flirting and playing around with the wife of the Spartan king, and if there's one thing you shouldn't do to a Spartan man, it's play around with his wife. So he had to flee quickly. He was safe in Persia for a bit, but eventually was accepted back into Athens, because their campaigns were going horribly, and they were desperate at this point. He gets kicked out of a high military position again, but lives in safety under the confines of some castle walls, until it becomes clear that Athens is going to be attacked and sacked by the Spartans, so he flees back to Persia. And eventually the Spartans call for his head, so Alcibiades is killed in Persia. Sad times for Alcibiades, but the dick move here was that Athens trusted him in the first place. And then he went behind their backs and betrayed them, even though it wasn't necessarily proven that he was indeed the person who played that horrible prank on Hermes. Still. Now, in comparison to Sparta, Athenian women had poor lives on paper. Like the Spartan women, they couldn't vote, and were expected to bear children as their main goal in lives. However, they couldn't own land, explore their cities, or easily divorce their husband, though it was at least possible for Athenian women to divorce their husbands. Children and mothers faced high mortality rates, and even higher-classed, respectable women couldn't do all that much. Of course, Athenian women most likely became mothers at a younger age and got married at a younger age than Spartan women as well, which of course didn't help the mortality rates of mothers and children. Slaves took care of domestic duties, so the housewife had even less responsibilities, and so outside of ordering the slaves around and taking care of the family, so there really wasn't that much to do. They could potentially die of boredom. Not entirely joking. I'm even mentioning this because Athenians, and well, Greeks generally, believed that women were less developed than men, with some great Athenian minds using women's roles as caregivers and their temperament as reasons for their natural inferiority. I mean, when you have someone like Aristotle, a very prestigious man, spouting this sort of stuff, it's pretty hard to argue with that, and very few actually could. And of course it was accepted throughout not only Athens, but the wider Greek society as well, so you could imagine how things would most likely suck for most of the Greek world. And because a lot of these men would have done a lot of their business in Athens, I'm essentially tagging it as an Athenian thing. I'm going to more or less end the video here, more so just because if I continue, it'll be less about the Athenians and more about the Greek world generally, or at least the ancient Greek world generally. So, yes, going to end it off here. If you enjoyed the video, go ahead and leave a like, and of course, subscribe to the channel for more content just like this. And tell me, who do you think were more dicks, the Athenians or the Spartans? Tell me all of that in the comment section below, and until the next video, have a very good day. I have been Prime, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye bye.